Oshae Brissett is a free agent for the Pacers this summer. Should the team bring him back, or should they even extend him before free agency? What are the pros and cons to both sides, and what do I ultimately think will happen? We'll get to it all today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today we are starting the Pacers players free agency preview, looking at Mr. Oshae Brissett, starting with him and starting today because last Friday he technically became extension eligible, except not really. It's confusing. We'll get to it all as the episode progresses. So Oshae Brissett, a free agent for the Pacers starting on July 1st, just wrapped up his third season with the team, but could have his contract extended before the offseason ends. Now, that's because he signed his contract with the team on April 21st of 2021. Because of the type of deal he signed, he became extension eligible 2 years later, but he was actually extension eligible starting on March 15th. I had to do a lot of digging to figure out the exact date, but because that was a COVID season, they had altered calendars. It remaps to a different date during the actual NBA season because the NBA season isn't normally going on April 21st for regular season games. But either way, Oshae Brissett is still extension eligible until free agency starts, and he's a free agent on July 1st if nothing happens. So this podcast will cover both the extension and his free agency and what I think will ultimately happen, because effectively, because they can do an extension now, he's a free agent right now. And there is some interesting layers to these early discussions, right? If a team and a player know right away they want to get it done, they want to be back, why wait? Well, there is a pro to waiting. We'll get to that in the second segment here. But, Robert Covington last offseason signed a 2-year extension with the Clippers on like May 10th or something, May 7th. I can't remember. Very early in May, right? Gary Harris, trying to think. There were some others that just extended before free agency even started. Thad Young, former Pacer, was one of them. There are a couple guys that did this because why, if you know what you want to do already and you can legally do it, why wait till free agency? So Brissett falls into that category, but it's not that cut and dry. And I'll explain all of it on today's show, but that is the extension part of it. So the parameters for this are as follows. For an extension, it's either 120% of a player's previous salary or 120% of the NBA league average salary for the first year of an extension. Now, Brissett is an unrestricted free agent starting in July, but using those extension parameters, the most he could get in year one of an extension is just under $14 million, basically, right? He's not worth that much, right? It's not a secret that Oshae Brissett is not a $14 million player. I don't even think he's close to a $14 million a year player, but that's the highest it can go, which means because he can fit in that, that's great. Any legal extension that Brissett would want that's within his market range is possible. An extension can only add 4 years, or can only make a deal 5 years in total length. So in Brissett's case, it can only be 4 years long. So the parameters set up that if Brissett were to sign an extension, the highest it could possibly go is 4 added years and about $62 million added, a little less than that. Obviously, again, he is not worth that much money as a player right the second. That is to illustrate that anything Brissett could want in free agency is also possible as an extension. So if him and the Pacers want to negotiate before July 1st, they could. And there are a lot of ways that they could land on a deal that makes sense before free agency starts. There's no extension rules that are, confusing and don't help here. There's no total money that doesn't make sense, but it is possible. And the biggest reason this could happen, the reason Brissett could be back with the Pacers on any direction, is he's a fine player and he plays a position that the Pacers need, right? Yes, they could use their roster spot in a different way and get a lot of value out of that. And roster spots are going to be the story of the Pacers summer. Well, again, we'll talk about the cons of this all in the second segment, but leading here today, and the headliner would be, if they did this, it's because if anything happens, if Brissett is on the Pacers next year, whether it's an extension or as a free agent, it's because he's a useful player and he wouldn't cost that much. And that alone is important. But also remember, he plays the 4, which the Pacers need depth at, right? If he walks, the only true four the Pacers have under contract heading into next season before the draft and free agency, granted, that's a huge caveat. They could draft one, they could sign one. They will likely look to do that, given how Kevin Pritchard talked about their positions of need at his press conference. But you even need more depth than what they had there. They only had two guys. They were small all the time. So he plays the four. That's important. They need those guys, right? That's valuable for him and for every team in the league. Right? Every team wants that position, that type of player. He's also 24, young on the Pacers timeline, right? Of their 10 guys who finished the season under Miles Turner's age, right? 25 or younger. They had 10 of them. He was one of them. He'll turn 25 before free agency actually starts. He turns 25 in June. Still a young player, excuse me. But that his age range is within the Pacers' age range. And he's likely not expensive, right? I don't think anyone is kidding themselves thinking that Oshae Brissett is a bank-breaking level of player. Like, he supplanted Torrey Craig in the Pacers rotation 2 years ago at times, and they're roughly equivalent players. I think Torrey Craig probably has a little more playoff utility than Oshae Brissett does, but they're both solidly impactful. Torrey Craig signed with the Pacers for 2 years, $10 million, right? Like, Brissett could get 2 for $9 or something like that. Maybe not quite Torrey Craig money because of that playoff utility. And remember, the Pacers at that time thought they were going to be building off of a play-in year. They had a new coach. They were going for it a little bit, right? They had playoff aspirations in a way that maybe they wouldn't now, but Brissett is definitely more than a minimum player, and that's where you land on that $4 or $5 million a year number. He knows the situation of the Pacers well, right? He played with their last era of team. He played in the play-in games. He played with the new era of the team. He transitioned from Bjorkgren to Carlisle, so he's kind of seen it all. He's ironically one of the longer tenured Pacers. It's like him and Turner and McConnell are some of the only guys who are holdovers from the last era. I missed a few in there for sure, but he's been here since 2021. Like, that's a long time given how much roster turnover the Pacers have had. And a big thing here is he's close with Tyrese Haliburton. That matters a lot. He fits the Pacers style well. He fits Haliburton's play style well, and they're close off the floor. That matters. That's certainly a factor in this discussion. So there are a lot of reasons the Pacers could decide to bring Oshae Brissett back. But I think if you had to just put it all in a thesis and say, spit out if ChatGPT was asked to spit out a one sentence, response why the Pacers should bring back Oshae Brissett, it would basically say he's a useful player that's not expensive, right? For every team in the NBA, that's the exact type of depth piece they want. I don't think the Pacers should be tripping over themselves to sign Brissett to a contract that, and then immediately saying, yeah, you're on rotation every single day, or we're promising you this sort of role, and that actually is going to matter in the second segment. We'll get to that. Or we'll play you over this guy or whatever, because they're going to have some fluidity in their starting five. Who knows who will and won't be back. They have Jordan Nwora, who seemingly passed him down the stretch of last season in terms of priorities and minutes, and that makes sense. He played great. So it's not like he'll even be more than a seventh, eighth, ninth man for the Pacers, so you shouldn't pay him as more than that. But if you can get him for not expensive amounts and he's young and he's talented, that's the kind of player that every team wants as their depth, right? I'm sure he'll find some sort of home this summer, mostly because of all of that. And so if you had to thesisize, which is not a word, if you had to put a motto or a headline on it and say, why would the Pacers want Oshae Brissett back? Well, because he's a useful player on a cheap contract. Maybe not a season changer, maybe not a guy who's in your playoff rotation, but still a good regular season depth, a valuable player that you'd want back. And so if you go through the free agency process, if you go through the draft and you're the Pacers and you've tied up your top 14 guys, or you've tied up the first 14 roster spots, and Brissett's still out there, and you have your full bird rights, then maybe you bring him back. Or the draft is over, and it's now June 25th, and you figured out your roster spots, and you made a bunch of trades, and you go, wow, we're really going to need depth at the four. Maybe you do an extension with Oshae Brissett before free agency, because, again, you have the legal means to do that, and no other team does. So perhaps that is a reason for the Pacers to consider an extension, to consider signing him and bringing him back. And all of those make good sense in their situation, but it's never that simple. There's always more to this. And so what are the reasons for the Pacers and Brissett to not pursue a reunion next year? And there are many, like there will be with every one of the Pacers' 5 free agents this year. If you want to read more about Brissett extension parameter stuff, I wrote a story about it on Forbes. Let's get to the cons part of this, because again, this summer for the Pacers will be confusing, and there will be lots of factors at play for every single decision. Before we do that, though, got to talk to you guys about PrizePicks, daily fantasy made easy. The most fun way to play daily fantasy sports. You can take Luka Doncic to score more or less than 26.5 points, or LeBron to have more or less than 7.5 rebounds. That's the entire premises and format of PrizePicks. You pick 2 to 6 players. Will they score more or less than their PrizePicks projection? If you're right, you go in up to 25 times your money on any entry. It's not you versus other people. It's just you versus the projections available. They have those projections on any sport you could watch, including the NBA, MLB, NHL, whatever. You can make your picks in 60 seconds or less. It's super easy. It's safe with fast withdrawals, operational over 30 states plus Canada. And there's a new $1 million daily Superflex promotion going on right now for the NBA playoffs. Every day of the playoffs, one PrizePicks user will win a chance at becoming a millionaire. One entry placed after 8 a.m. Eastern will be randomly selected every day. Whoever placed it will be given a 6-pick flex with the following payouts. You can get $1 million if you get 6 correct, $80,000 if you get 5 correct, and $16,000 if you get 4 correct. You can find full details at prizepicks.com/million. You must opt in at that link to be eligible for that. But go check it out yourself. Super fun. Download the PrizePicks app. Go to prizepicks.com. You can get an instant deposit match of 100% up to $100 when you sign up with the code LOCKEDON. Don't forget that code LOCKEDON. Sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks daily fantasy made easy. And we're talking about Nissan again. We got to name our Nissan Most Electric Player of the Week, brought to you by the all-new, all-electric 2023 Nissan Ariya. I'm not even going to make this one Pacers related or ex-Pacers related. I'm going to go off what I just watched happen, which was Anthony Edwards being that dude in overtime for the Minnesota Timberwolves. Huge step back three, shaking Aaron Gordon in his boots to get the Timberwolves a win, a no sweep for the Denver Nuggets in that series. 6 shot from a player who's going to be so good one day. Anthony Edwards is just an awesome player. He's electric. He's fierce. He's fiercely elegant, stunningly powerful, and elegantly powerful, delivering on duality, a combination of fierceness and elegance, beautiful but strong. The perfect SUV crossover, just like the 2023 Nissan Ariya, which packs pity-to-your-seat power and premium intelligence all into one electric vehicle. The electric vehicle for people who love to drive. Shop now at NissanUSA.com. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, hop on over to Locked On Timberwolves to hear about what I just said in that ad read. Anthony Edwards, 6 shot in overtime. Great performance. The Timberwolves tried to blow it. Horrible final 2.5, 3 minutes of that game, but they still got it done, extending the series. Only one sweep in the first round this year. Love that. I love this playoffs. Man, they've been so good this year. Every series, I feel like there's just some interesting back and forth, even though it looks like a lot of them are going to end in 5 or 6. But it's been so much fun. Let's talk back on the Oshae Brissett discussion, extension, free agency, whatever. I want to do one of these shows for every Pacers free agent. I'll probably combine an episode for George Hill and James Johnson and another one for Gabe York and Kendall Brown. But Brissett, because the extension part of this, I felt like I could do a full show, and he became eligible in a normal circumstance on Friday, although technically it happened in March, like I said in the first segment. Why wouldn't the Pacers and Oshae Brissett want to pursue an extension or pursue a new deal or move forward together, right? He's been solid for the team since they signed him in 2021. Well, for the Pacers, the headliner would read roster spots. They do not have many, and that is going to be the dance that they tiptoe all summer long, right? I asked Kevin Pritchard about it at his end-of-season presser. He talked about it. The math is just confusing. They have 3 outgoing free agents on standard NBA deals between Brissett, James Johnson, and George Hill. That's been talked about ad nauseum and will continue to be for the next 2 months. They also only have 2 two-way spots. Brissett's not two-way eligible, but Kendall Brown and Gabe York. So they have 3 standard spots and 2 two-way slots opening up, and they have a lot of cap space. Impossible to know before the draft, but they'll have a lot of cap space, presumably, and they'll have 5 draft picks, right? They don't have enough spots on their team to make the signings they want and make the draft picks they want unless they trade players away or they don't sign anybody. And that might not even be possible because there might be a new rule that you have to reach the salary floor below this before the season starts, TBD on how the new CBA implementation is going to go. There's a lot of things the Pacers will have to know about that. Either way, they're going to have a fantastically complicated summer, and a big part of that's going to be the roster spot dance. And so this is the biggest argument against an extension for the Pacers is filling up a roster spot before free agency starts, right? You can't trade a guy you extend at within certain parameters. You can't trade a guy you extend for 6 months, right? That would go well past July, right? Is that something the Pacers want to do? Is that if they know they want to use a spot on Brissett, sure, that's fine. But then you can't use it on something else. Your summer becomes more complicated. And all of a sudden you have to think about trading away a player to open up a spot or trading away a draft pick to open up a spot. And if it's a crappy pick or a player that's not in your future, sure, if you do that to clear a spot for a guy you actually want, that makes sense, right? That doesn't say don't do it. But if it becomes cost prohibitive to clear that spot by making a trade or making a move, then it's not worth it, right? He's not the cost prohibitive part of that. If it's too strong to be worth the benefit of having Brissett, it's not worth it. So roster spots are a big factor. That's going to be a factor with James Johnson and George Hill as well. And that's going to be a big theme for the Pacers this summer. How do they get the spots to add the stuff they want to add? And it might depend on where they land after the lottery. It might depend on how much cap space they end up having after draft night, right? All these factors are going to play in to how they determine what they want to do. But for Brissett specifically, and the extension part of this is locking that in before the draft or before the lottery especially, seems exceedingly unlikely because of that. Maybe post lotto if they understand a little bit better what they might or might not be able to do. But before lottery, it seems crazy unlikely because the roster spot dance for the Pacers is just going to be crazy. They have 12 guys already on their team next year with all the picks in space. It's going to be really hard to squeeze all that in. And the other part of this is if you extend a guy now, sure, his contract is extended and it's on the books for next season, and that's great and it's done. It also cuts into your cap space if you're the Pacers. Your cap space this summer before July 30th, right? The Pacers could technically make a draft night trade based on their current cap situation. That would not change, right? An extension does not change what Brissett is owed or what his cap hit is this season, but it would add money to next season. That would eat into your cap space, and the Pacers could have at max space or near max space, whatever phrasing you want to use. Again, it's not going to be known until the draft. It's not worth discussing. I'll try to at some point, but it's not really worth it in this current setting. Either way, you're chewing into that to extend a Brissett when you could just re-sign him and his cap hold is super low, right? It's a minimum salary cap hold, right? His salary is going to be more than that. So keeping his cap hold and bird rights on your ledger is actually cheaper than extending him early, even if you come to that agreement ahead of time. So from a roster spots perspective, from a cap perspective, it doesn't really make a ton of sense. Again, unless the Pacers know they're getting him on a deal that they love and they want to do this anyway, and they know that already and they want the clarity, right? That makes sense. But from a high-level roster spots and money perspective, doesn't make that much sense. If you're Oshae Brissett, the flip side of this, what's the point of an extension? If you want to be back with the Pacers, that's fine and dandy. Like that could happen at any time between now and whenever, summer league, training camp, whenever. But why do an extension unless you hate all other 29 teams? Because on July 1 or whenever free agency opens, we can all, understand how this works. You're limiting your options if you extend. You don't get to hear what other teams want. Perhaps the Pacers extension offer is good and you might want to go back, but then it turns out another team has been infatuated with your skills for a while and they offer $2 million a year more than the Pacers do. That is a reason to wait until free agency. You could sign that deal, make more money, get a better role, or a team that is offering you, this is a big part of this, that bigger opportunity appears in unrestricted free agency, right? For Brissett, who's played a lot for the Pacers, right? Like over 150 games in the 3 seasons he's been with the Pacers. He's still had like out of the rotation for these games or bit role for these games, right? Not a big minutes opportunity, and he's played a lot because of injuries and trades and all that kind of stuff. But there could perhaps there's another team out there that would say, we'll guarantee you a role or a spot or a certain amount of minutes, and that could be attractive for a player like him who's young and could be playing for a future contract, and having that guaranteed role could be appealing, right? There's a lot of factors for Brissett out there that to me suggests even if he potentially wants to come back to the Pacers, like he alluded to, right? You can go back about 2 weeks to a podcast I did where I shared the audio of what all the players said about their free agency at X interviews. Brissett, even if he wants to come back, why not hear what the other offers are? Why not hear what else is out there from a role and money perspective? So an extension seems unlikely. Now, if you get to unrestricted free agency and stuff changes in a way you don't expect, or other teams don't offer you what you think could be out there, and the Pacers offer still great, and it's exactly what you wanted, and you get to be their, reserve power forward again, great. Maybe that makes sense and they go back to that, but it doesn't make sense for him to do anything before free agency because of that. The offer's the same, right? It's not, again, there's nothing about the extension and his free agency number that would be so drastically different that waiting isn't quite worth it for him, especially at his cap hold. So there are a lot of reasons for the Pacers and Brissett to say, nah, you know what? Here's what a contract could look like, but we don't need to do this now. We don't have to commit to anything right this second. Again, if you're Brissett, sign it as soon as possible, get the guaranteed money. Maybe there's something to that, but there's so much at play here that suggests it maybe doesn't make sense, that perhaps he would sign elsewhere, or at least wait to see what else happens in free agency before inking something with the Pacers. So what do I think is going to happen? How's this going to go? Well, let's clear that up in this final segment. Before we get to that, though, I got to talk to you guys about Ultimate Pro Basketball GM, our favorite trash talking app and the Locked On Hosts group chat. You can compete for some money. We're competing for a prize in that group chat right now. The coolest game I've played in a while, Ultimate Pro Basketball GM. If you think you'd be a good NBA GM, try this. It's super fun. You can deal with challenging personalities of a basketball team, hire coaches and assistants, trade and train players, make draft picks, navigate through free agency, every strategic aspect of your franchise, all in this challenging and realistic game world. Ultimate Pro Basketball GM, completely free, playable offline, play on the go as you want and when you want to. It's really fun. Like I said, a lot of trash talk among the Locked On hosts to see who can win the most titles in a 20-year frame. Locked On Pacers listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code Locked On in the game store, all one word. So make sure to check it out. To download the game, just visit probasketballgm.com. Scan the barcode on your screen right now if you're watching on YouTube, or look it up in the app stores at probasketballgm.com. Ultimate Basketball GM. Start your dynasty today. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, Locked On Warriors. Kylan Mills and Cyrus Satas will break down maybe the best series of the first round, Kings Warriors 2-2. Every game's been fun of that series so far. And the Warriors almost had one of the most colossal, catastrophic playoff disasters on Sunday, but they held on to win. Let's conclude today, as I will with every free agent, what I think will happen. Some gut feelings, and this could change, right? Going back a few summers ago, I thought it made more sense for the Pacers to re-sign Doug McDermott than it did TJ McConnell, until they added a forward in Chris Duarte and actually freed up point guard minutes on draft night. And then it made more sense for them to bring back McConnell. So this is early. A lot could change in this process, but this is what I think right now. I think that Oshae Brissett not back with the Pacers. Why do I think that? Well, it just sort of, from a roster spot perspective, seems like the Pacers would like to really wait on their own free agents. And that includes everybody. The two vets that are free agents, maybe Kendall Brown because he's restricted, they'll jump on a little sooner. But Kevin Pritchard's quote at his end of season press conference when discussing, lumped into one, granted, he didn't go into specifics on anybody, but when discussing all three of Brissett, George Hill, James Johnson, those guys are guys that we'll be looking at. And then he said, but with all these draft picks and cap space, they're not July 1 deals, they're July 10 deals. I don't think we get to that decision tree until later on, which that makes sense as a line of thinking, right? Maybe they're your backup plans. That's kind of what I said with Brissett. You circle back if you don't get the 40 you want, or if you need depth at the position. And the vets, the vets are the last guys you sign on any team. They're usually minimum deals anyway. That makes sense to describe them that way. But Brissett's as a backup plan, is that what he's going to want when he could want to do something sooner, or get on a team that prioritizes him a little more, or could prioritize him more? Maybe he's not worth that to any team, right? Maybe not. He was just a below 40% shooter and averaged like 6 and 3, right? That's not like tripping over yourselves to sign him levels. But again, he's a 24-year-old forward who doesn't make a lot of mistakes. Like, someone's going to sign him. By July 10th, it seems like the Pacers, because they have so many roster spots, because so much is going to change for them, and they're going to have to do all sorts of things, right? Rick Carlisle's quote was, the team will look a lot different next year. There's no question about that. There's no a lot in there. I just read a quote wrong. He said the team will look different next year. There's no question about that, right? If you're Oshae Brissett, waiting 10 days into free agency, like, all of a sudden your offers are going to go down. It's going to be worse. And so for the Pacers, who don't have a ton of roster spots already, right, they want to use they say they want to go for the playoffs, right, that 45-50 win range. They have some talent to do that, but it seems like they're going to want to use their roster spots and their assets to either acquire guys with high ceilings or get well-established players so they can improve in future seasons. And while Brissett, again, is valuable and would have value to their team next year, it seems like they don't have enough roster spots to prioritize him in a way that makes sense. I don't think an extension makes any sense because, again, he could just sign the same deal that he would get as an extension as a free agent. So sure, rule out the extension part. It's legal now, but it doesn't make sense. But in terms of actual signing, there's a little bit of reasons that make sense, as I explained, but I think the cons for both parties are strong enough that it doesn't happen, right? You don't want to chew to that cap space too early. You want to be able to use it the most constructive way possible, especially because if you're the Pacers and you have full bird rights on a guy, you don't need to use your cap space up. You could sign everything and then bring him back. The extension part doesn't make sense. The roster spot crunch is crazy if you're Brissett too. Seeing what's out there, seeing if there's a bigger role, more money, more opportunity, a million things he could want, right? Maybe that makes more sense for him. So my gut feeling here is this doesn't happen, even though from a talent perspective, there are reasons for it to happen. And the extension part of it just complicates things, but I don't think that's a big factor here. Now, if there is mutual interest, and maybe there is, right? Again, he's talented. He's 24. He could be 25. He knows the players. He's close with Halliburton, right? If there's mutual interest, perhaps something gets done. Perhaps they say, look, here's what our offer will be if you're still out there on this date. Or, if we haven't figured it out by this date, this is what our offer will be. And if you're Brissett, that might be the best case scenario where you go out, see if there's something better. You're right. He's an unrestricted free agent. There's no match rights for the Pacers. If he signs somewhere else, he's gone. Maybe they look out and sniff around and say, what else is there? Okay, nothing. Let's do this, right? If the mutual interest exists, perhaps that's a way that this could go down. Technically, he could be signed and traded. No, that doesn't really make sense in this situation. It rarely does. People always ask about sign and trades. They're so rare and confusing. But that makes no sense here. So there's a lot of, in theory, reasons why the Pacers would sniff around on this and say, here's what our offer would be, or would you accept this kind of role or whatever. But there's also reason for Brissett to go, well, I'm going to go look for more in every way. Money, role, situation, anything. At that age he's at, you're hunting for not only a good home for you now, but a place where you can set yourself up for future contracts and future opportunities and, all sorts of things, right? What's his family situation? He's Canadian. Maybe he wants to play, he already played for the Raptors. Maybe he wants to do that again. I don't know. I'm just making these up, but there are a million things that could play into it beyond mutual interest with your old team. That means this process could carry into free agency. So to me, my gut feeling, just a gut feeling, Oshae Brissett will not be back next year, even though if he does return, I would understand it. I would probably handicap it at like 25, 30% right now, but that is just a prediction. It almost feels like both parties' priorities would not be each other, even though both parties would be happy if they stayed together. Does that make any sense? It seems like Brissett's priorities would be more money than he makes now and more minutes, and the Pacers could offer the money but not the minutes, and they definitely would want to use their roster spots in a different way at first and perhaps circle back. And if you're Brissett, all those things are out there. If you're the Pacers, maybe none of those things are out there and you end up together, but it seems like it would make sense for them to be together, even though their priorities might be a little higher. And if you have to trade away guys to make a roster spot for him, right, then the cost prohibitive part comes in, and it just doesn't make sense to do that just to fit him in. So my gut feeling is Oshae Brissett will not be with the Pacers next year, but let's just look. I'm not saying they should do this. I'm not saying I've heard this. I don't know anything, but let's just say a draft night trade comes and the other team's like, we need Jordan Nwora to make this happen, and we need Aaron Nesmith, and all of a sudden they have no forwards. All of a sudden, maybe on June 25th, the Pacers go, oh, wow, we really need Oshae Brissett, and there's definitely going to be minutes for him next year. And Brissett goes, oh, that's great. I love to hear these last couple of years. Maybe they get something done before free agency starts. Like, you can't know before the draft. But what we know now of what's been said, what we know now of the Pacers' goals next year, what we know now of who the Pacers currently have under contract, what we know now about the free agency situation for the Pacers and Brissett and the roster spot situation, this doesn't seem like a marriage that will last beyond this season. But that is just a gut feeling, and we'll see how the offseason evolves. I hope that all makes sense. If you had questions or think I said something dumb, comment on YouTube or tweet at me right here at TEastNBA on Twitter. I might change that, so TBD if you've been used to that. I am one of the people who lost their Twitter check thingy when Twitter Blue overtook us all, and I might use that opportunity to change my @ on Twitter because I don't just cover the NBA anymore. Hope you guys had a great weekend. Caitlin and I back tomorrow for season reviews doing reserve forward. So Aaron Nesmith, Oshae Brissett, ironically, Kendall Brown, and Jordan Nwora. And we'll do Miles Turner later this week. Special guest coming later this week as well, and doing Pacers and League awards this week. Lots of fun stuff for you everydayers on Locked On Pacers. So again, hope everybody had a great weekend. Hope you can stick around for plenty of more fun shows this week, and next week we'll start diving into the NBA draft. Hope everybody had a fantastic day and show. We will see you soon.